All right, FMOD wizards, I've got a problem. So I'm just experimenting with an idea in FMOD, not related to any sort of project I'm working on, just kind of keeping my FMOD skills up, and was trying to think of a way to create a variable length step sequencer in FMOD without using any external tools. So only using FMOD can I create a variable length step sequencer. So here is where I'm at, that I've got a main event, which I'm calling sequence. That main event is associated with a series of global parameters. One, which is the length of the sequence, which can be any value between 1 and 16. A step count, which lets us know which step of that 16 or potentially 16 step sequence we're on. And then whether or not, in this case, a kick drum should occur on any of those 16 steps as just on-off parameters. So this sequence or this event is just a quarter note long loop, and that's something I'll come back to, but a quarter note long loop that repeats over and over again. At the start of the loop, it triggers at a sub-event that I'm calling steps, which this is my second attempt at it, so it's version 2 of those steps. And at the end of that sequence, it triggers a control sub-event. So let's start with looking at the steps sub-event. So this steps sub-event, has the same global parameters in it that we have the current step count and then whether or not each step is supposed to be on or off. Then it has a single parameter sheet that has the 16 steps, so we can navigate across those steps. And then each step has a sub-event on it that I'm calling instrument. Just a quick look at instrument. Instrument currently just contains a kick drum sample. The reason for the sub-event is so that all I have to do is replace this sound if I want to switch out any other sound in this into the step sequencer without disrupting the total workflow. So if we look at each step, there is a trigger behavior for each of these steps that simply monitors for if its associated on-off global parameter is on, then when we get this one, it triggers. So if we look at step 2, this one is listening to step 2, so on and so forth through each of the steps. So all this event does is when it's played, it gets the current step count, it triggers the event on that step, and then it checks to see if that step is supposed to be on or off. And if it's on, then it plays. So that's what happens as the first part of the loop within the sequence is we trigger the steps event. It looks to see what step we're on. If that step is turned on, it triggers that event. Over here at the end of the sequence, we have the control sub-event, and this is what handles navigating through the potential 16 steps of the loop. So if we go look at that control sequence, here's what's going on. I'm going to ignore this top track for the moment and just focus on the main logic of this, that there's two parts of this logic. We either increment the step count or we reset the step count. And I couldn't figure out a simpler way of doing this or a more efficient way than doing this than having 15 incrementers and 16 resetters. So if I look at increment number 1, this is a command instrument, and all this command instrument does is it sets the parameter known as step count to the value of 2. So in this case would be on step 1, and so we'd set the value to 2. If we look at its trigger behaviors, it's monitoring 2 global parameters. It's monitoring the step count. So if the step count is 1 and the sequence length is greater than 1, then this one gets triggered, which means that we take our step count and we change it from 1 to 2. Then the next one here checks to see is the step count 2 and is the sequence length greater than 2? If so, then we set it to 3, so on and so forth. So a whole bunch of incrementers. I probably could have done this with an incrementer, but as I was trying to figure out other issues with it, this was the easiest way for me to do it, is just to write out the full logical sequence for the incrementer to be confident that that wasn't a part of a problem that I was encountering earlier in doing this. So there's 15 of those because the maximum step length is 16. So when we get to it being 16, we don't need to increment anymore. We only need to reset, which brings me to the second half of this logic, which is 16 resetters, which is the same idea, command instruments that are targeting the step count, always setting its value to 1, and then just monitoring for, is the step count between 1 and 16, and is the step length 1? If so, set it back to 1. And then each of these just monitors for different step lengths, or sorry, step counts and sequence lengths. So that logic is working. If we go back to the sequence and I mute out this track and I hit play, we can see that the step count is going 1 through 16. When it gets to 16, it resets. If I change the loop length to anything other than that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can see that the sequence length and the step count is working. But now what's not working is this instrument only triggering once per step. So if I unmute this and we listen to it, right now I've got, let's set this back to 16 steps. Step count is back to 1. So I've turned on step 1, step 5, step 9, and step 13. So we should get every 4 of the loop, this thing repeats. So if I hit play, there it is. So sometimes we're getting that like double trigger, and it's even worse if I make this the ultimate goal, which is to make this be a 16th note loop. And so that way we can get a 4 on the floor. So that should just be a doom, 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 just a classic 4 on the floor kick drum. So it's not working. We're getting this double trigger kind of thing happening. What I believe is going wrong is that if we look at step sequence, that the trigger or the step sequence or the step count is constantly moving across. It's getting updated. And what's happening is that this sub-event of steps V2 is still active when I get to step 5 here. So we trigger on step 1, we hear the first instrument or the first kick drum. We then move to step 3, step 2, step 3, step 4. All of those are currently set to off, so none of those trigger, but we get to step 5, and then we trigger it before we've gotten around to the start of the loop again. So in other words, step 5 is being triggered by this thing rather than by this thing. So that's where I'm stuck. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to make sure that it only does this once per loop. So what I've tried to do is I've tried in my control, that's what this first track is another command instrument that stops an event, and the event that it stops is steps V2. So that every time we get to this thing, the first thing we do is we stop this event, and then we increment the count, and that brings us around to the start of the loop again, which should restart steps V2. That's what I tried doing. We could also try doing that at the instrument level. Right? Yeah, so go to the control, and rather than stopping steps V2, stop the instrument. Let's try that. Yeah, still double triggering. So I don't know. That's where I'm stuck at. So FMOD wizards out there, how would you do this? How would you create a variable step or variable length step sequencer that allowed you to turn on and off per steps and to change the number of steps within a sequence. Yeah, thanks for the help. Looking forward to hearing your solutions.